Alrighty, good morning. This is the Schusterian Logic podcast. My name is Brian Schuster, and today I want to take a step back because I've largely focused on this channel over the last 15, 18 episodes or so, really focusing in on lessons you can learn, interviews that with people who have traversed the path from boot camp or self-taught to a career in software development. And I realized that throughout that time, I really haven't taken any steps to try to tell my story or why I'm interested in this field, how I got involved. So today, and probably over a few podcasts, I want to remedy that. I want to do a better job of being open on why this industry matters to me, why why I want to help people. And really the simple answer to that is that because I feel deeply connected to the people in this industry, because my story is one of having to go from self-taught to and actually even before that, not thinking I could even enter the industry, just thinking that was an impossibility, that there was no chance of me ever being a software developer, that it was just something that was that I had missed. Going from that to a DevOps engineer at IBM, which is a technology role inside of a technology company. And when making that transition, there's a lot of key points I do talk about, interviews I've had, places, but they're always in the middle, someplace along the journey. Like the journey has started. And in my experience, I found that starting was absolutely the hardest. There's nothing that compared to it. Along the way, I've been teaching myself other technologies, and there were challenges there, but nothing as challenging as like getting that first real experience, that first real tech. So today I feel hopefully I can help someone in understanding what's one path look like, and hopefully give them some inspiration to continue on. So let's start with that. So I graduated among the midst of the Great Recession in 2010. I graduated from UNC Chapel Hill and graduated with a business degree from a pretty good business school. As far as business schools go, since then I've been kind of down on business schools overall. Like, I don't think they're bad, but I think they're, would have rather gone into economics now knowing what I know, but that's a story for another day. But I graduated in 2010 and I needed to get a job. And this was a time when like you could not get a job. It was difficult, like up until that point, the narrative was still very much, if you get a college degree of any type, of any sort, you would be okay. So I got a business degree, and I saw like, oh, my classmates were leaving. They're making $70K a year working in New York and Chicago and, all these great places. So I thought clearly I'd do okay. Well, that was not the case. I left school and it immediately went into panic mode. I was very fortunate. I got married right out of school, and my wife got into law school in Indianapolis. So we packed up and moved to Indianapolis. And there just were not great job prospects. I mean, better than some places in the country. Jobs were really hard pretty much everywhere. But, I was, I just went out and tried to get work. And it just didn't line up with my, my work at all. It was just sales jobs. The two sales jobs that I got offers for one of them was as an insurance salesman. Really, really typical, healthcare, health insurance, life insurance, that sort of sales. That was one job that I got. And the other one was actually car sales, which again, another deal, very typical sort of role. Wouldn't have been, bad work. I was very grateful to have anything, but didn't line up with what I was expecting. And then at that point, I've been working for I had worked for my family business in, college and high school. We ran, as I'm gonna call, a rinky-dink insurance company in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's not rinky-dink. It actually ended up, being over 100 employees. But to me, at least, it was a small insurance company. And my dad basically said, we're not going to hire you out of school. And I thought, okay, fair enough. I'm going to go out. I'm going to make my own path. I was not opposed to that. And then, out of the blue, while I was considering these sales jobs, and I guess I would have been talking to my dad, he would have known I was going through this. I get a call from my uncle who runs sales in the Midwest for the insurance company. And he calls me and says, "Hey, well, you're a Schuster. You are located in an area where we need a salesperson. Indiana has sales. So, instead of just trying to hire somebody randomly, would you be interested in joining the company?" And at that point, I was like, look, I'm either going to do car sales, insurance sales, or I get to do sales, insurance sales, but for my family business. So I thought, yeah, I take that. And that was really, really the start. And the reason I say that is because even though this didn't have anything to do with software, that was really my mindset at that point. I am in business. I'm going to do sales because I want to learn sales. Technology, not something that was going to be a part of my life. Up until that point, I had, really gotten my lessons from, popular culture. Like in college, I was really, really obsessed with the idea of starting a business, becoming a founder, starting a big technology company. And when the social network came out, that was huge for me. That was huge for my friends even who were interested in technology too. I remember, going over to a friend's place and watching the social network. And that to me was the model on how you started a business. And it wasn't just the social network. Another one that I would really love, about, young founders was Pirates of Silicon Valley, which was, about Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, but before Steve Jobs returned to Apple. So this was like his phase one, and about Bill Gates and Steve Jobs battling it out. But, that movie and their story combined with the story of Mark Zuckerberg and how he started Facebook, and how he was a genius young coder, started Facebook out of his dorm room, made me believe that okay, the way you get into software is by starting young, because I wanted to be a founder. I wanted to be a billionaire. So it's like, okay, you need to start young. You need to have a lot of experience going into college. You need to be a computer science major, and preferably you should come up with a $1 billion idea while in your dorm room. I didn't have that leaving school. I had a business degree. I had very little prospects, and I didn't know how to enter the field or do anything. So sales seemed like a great place for me to learn. So that kicked off my journey with working. And of course, I learned sales. At the time didn't feel good for it. I mean, I learned how to make cold calls, but I didn't really, it didn't really connect with the work. And fortunately, my dad kind of either recognized that or saw an opportunity for me, because while I worked for the business in the past, I found operational issues. I would study spreadsheets, find issues, and I would parse them out and go and say, look, we got issues, we got loss ratio problems, whatever. And I don't know if it's because I wasn't doing well in sales or because there was another opportunity. At least in my mind, I don't think I was doing too poorly. But then I got moved over to, operations and was going to help with operational issues. And very quickly, I got my first, call it stroke of luck. So whenever you're making a transition or you're moving elsewhere, you have to recognize the role luck plays in your life. Out of all the things that happened to me, I know I put a lot of effort into moving into technology myself. And it's one of those things that is as close to my own accomplishment as I can. Even with business, I can't really take credit for that. My family business started when I was 9 years old. I got swept into the business. So that was, I grew up knowing that. So it's that was a gift. But technology was really my own. This was really the one area where I got really lucky. I had to put in a lot of work, but there was luck here. I got put into operations and I was handed a business problem, but there was a technology component to it. So my dad basically came to me and he said, there's a problem we have. Our loss ratio, because we're an insurance company, is just going nuts. We're getting hit with massive, multi-$100,000 claims. And that's a big deal for the size of company we had. We don't know where they're coming from. We think we're going to be super profitable, but all of a sudden we just get hit with, this really huge losses, and not just, recent losses, like losses from months ago we can't see. We hired a company to go build us out a dashboard and, a datamart and use this tool called Tableau. We have no clue how it works. We just, we looked at the dashboard. It doesn't do its job. It's broken. The numbers are wrong. And we have a bunch of licenses to Tableau. We're not getting rid of that. can you look at it and fix this? And really, I approached this like a business person. I thought, well, okay, well, we have this loss ratio problem. We wouldn't need to solve that. So I went back to my room, and this was like, I didn't know it at the time, but this was really the start. Like, nobody really told me this was technology. Nobody really told me what field I was entering in. All I knew is that I had a problem in front of me, and I had to conceptualize a tool. And so I looked at the data mart, and I couldn't make heads or tails of it. It was some language. Turned out it was SQL, and I didn't know what it was doing. But I had spent a lot of time with spreadsheets. So I was thinking about like, okay, I need to figure out loss ratio. So, okay, so what's loss ratio? Well, you make a certain amount of money over the course of a year. Okay, fine. So if I go and look at it at a yearly like, can I break that down to a certain number? It's like, well, yeah, I mean, if you get paid, $365 a year, you can break that down $1 per day, and you get, $1 per day. Great. So then you take a look at, okay, well, claims come in. Well, claims hit on a very particular day and time. Like, they come in particular, there. So if somebody gets a PM and it costs $50, it's going to hit on a particular day. And this is just me thinking of the process. So if I can get a product and I can see the item down at a particular granularity, and this is a concept in data analytics. No one was explaining this to me. I just kind of I was just trying to solve a problem. And then I go and say, okay, well, if I could see a particular item on a particular day, see how much money we made for that day, and then take a look at our losses, I could theoretically sum these up at pretty good granularities. Like, if I wanted to go from day, I could sum up to the month and sum to the year. And I'm not sure if I came up with that idea or if the Tableau software kind of helped me move in that direction. But that's how I ended up thinking. Where it's like, okay, I can summarize these things, and I can theoretically summarize for a year. So like, okay, so now you have an individual item. Can you do that for multiple items? And it's like, well, okay, yeah, I can get information like the account details. I can find the category of equipment. I can find the individual items. I can find, all these, details. And fortunately, our software system, which was called Emma, it was our own software that we built for the company, had this software that we could end up, had all these categorizations. It was not an easy database to use, and I'm getting into, how I ended up creating this data mart. But I ended up going and coming up with this model. So at that point, I had an idea, and I was working for my boss at the time, a gentleman by the name of Todd Huntley. He, was kind of the old master of the spreadsheets, and he had these massive macros that fit into Excel, like pre-Tableau sort of work. And sometimes the spreadsheets were wrong. So we had to sit down and think, so I used this help, and I think I'm absolutely certain I'm taking more credit than I should here, because again, I cannot underestimate how little I knew, like I knew so little, but I did have this strong idea of, okay, well, this is what we want to create. So I sat down and I kind of gave him my idea, and I said, well, okay, well, I want a database that does this, that comes in, and when a new claim comes in, it comes in on the same day, it goes into this database. Every day we conceptualize what the revenue is, and we can create something like a loss ratio. That connected me to their back office and the IT team. And I ended up getting to our SQL expert, gentleman by the name of Braxton. And he's like the first guy that like really attempted to teach me technology. When I originally started off on the journey, Todd was teaching me some stuff, but like he was self-taught too. So he got into this whole self-taught journey, ended up becoming like one of our top IT guys. But like he was really focused on the business. He helped me where he could. But like when it came to getting like actually deep, I had to go, someplace else. Braxton was the person I went to. So he was, sitting down with me, and I would explain to them how to go through SQL. And here's the thing. He was a pretty typical developer where like, you had to learn how to communicate with him. But knowing what I know now, he could have very easily told me to fuck off. I mean, I knew so little about the subject matter, and now knowing how developers operate, it would have been really easy for him to come back and say, no, I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to do this. Just go off and do this. Just hand me the problem. I'll figure it out and do that. I didn't appreciate it at the time. He didn't do that. I came back and I said, hey, I want to learn about, this thing, SQL. Okay, what is that? And he actually sat down and explained how SQL worked. He showed me how database queries work. He showed me how those systems did. And no one had to do that. No one told him to do that. I mean, maybe they did. Again, maybe because I was the boss's son, maybe it was like luck that he wanted to make that happen. But the truth is, there were other developers who actually did do that to me. Who said, I'm not going to teach you this, or you're not interested. Sorry, kid. But he actually sat me down and explained what was going on in the system. And there was a lot of complexity there, because now knowing how, data objects get stored in, transactional databases and how they get pulled into analytics databases. And again, we're talking about back in 2011, 2012. So we're talking SSIS inside of, Microsoft, database. Like there was a fair bit of complexity there that he hid away from me. But we still solved the problem. So like I go out and I gave him the demands. And again, I don't know if it was just me, if my boss was a part of it. But ultimately he got a requirement, and that ended up creating a datamart. It took several months to create. I didn't know why it took several months. Now I know. Now I know why it was so complex, because there was a lot of issues that had to get worked through. And he really combed through it. He got the details, and then it got to a point where it was steady. And I had a data mart. So he was, the data engineer. And I ended up becoming sort of the data analyst / BA. So what I ended up doing then is I took, once the data mart was set, that's, at first I was just kind of crawling. That's when I could start running, because I could go into the database and go run a SQL query, run and get some data, go and validate the data with the data guys to say, okay, do the claims in this system match up over here? Yes, great. Does the revenue match up? We could do that. And all of a sudden that gave me a play area. And this is the part where like I just count my lucky stars, that I got to be here. Because I think more than anything else, this was my entryway into the industry. There's a second story. I may save that for another podcast, because I don't want that to be too long, of how I taught myself Python, which that was truly self-taught. But at the same time, it wasn't, for me, that was like a personal journey, versus this was the thing where the first job really taught me the role. And what ended up happening is that I had a place where I could play, so I could run queries where it's like, okay, great, and it wasn't even running queries directly on the SQL database. That came later. But it got to play inside on top of Tableau, and I was like, drag and drop, see the command. Okay, great. Let me go see underlying data. Okay, what happens if we end up doing, subsets here, like, a subset of the data? What happens if we filter? There. And so there was this great system. Well, then I would go and take that data, go back to my, Todd, and then eventually my dad, and say, hey, here's some interesting data for you. And he'd go and say, well, that doesn't look right. And I thought that was a problem. Turns out that's the process. That's how you build good data sets. You go out, you test the data. The business knows what they're looking for. I mean, that's the thing they rarely teach you when you're doing data analytics. The business almost always knows what the data should look like, or at least what the underlying assumptions look like. Like, I can't tell you how many times the data team got back and they got something they thought looked pitch perfect, and a data person in the business looked at it and said, that's wrong. And they were right. Where there was a filter missing. There was a requirement there. There was some data being double counted. There's a few times where the data team comes back and says, no, that's the right data. And they're shocked. But the business people are really, their job is to be connected to that sort of business. They know the assumptions of the data. They don't know the particulars, and they need data to prove it, but they know that information. That's the process I got to learn with, my dad, where he says, that's not right because there's some filter. And we had to go back and figure out, well, why is the data wrong? Did we double count something? Did we include something that wasn't there? Is there something we considered to be part of the book of business, but my dad, the business, didn't consider to be part of the business? So I had this really convenient feedback loop where I could go and get the database. It was already created. The data mart was running. It was smooth. I could go test the data, go in, grab information, go back and test with, first my dad, then the different parts of the business. And I had no clue what this job was. I just, I didn't even give myself a job title when I worked for the business. I just called myself the Department of Analytics. I didn't have a job title because what I was doing was so foreign to me that this just seemed like its own thing. So that's where I really did my best work. And I actually got to create more data sets on top of it because I got to learn the extent of Tableau. I got to learn the extent of SQL. I wanted to learn SQL. I thought that was really exciting stuff. And then, so I decided, well, I want to learn more. So I went and ended up taking up a SQL course online. This was right as online courses were becoming more big. They were called MOOCs at that point, massive open online courses. I'm not even sure if that's terms used today. But I took one from, I believe it was Stanford. There was a SQL professor who, she taught the course, and it was just the basics of SQL and doing that. And fortunately, like, I had test databases to go into. Like, you had the samples like from the course where like, okay, this is kind of baby stuff, but then I could go to like the real datamart that was created for me. I'm like, okay, let's go and combine data sets. Let's go into the underlying data. And I now had access to that. So I could go and query multiple data sets to go and see, okay, I can see this work. I could see what an inner join looked like. I could see what a union looked like. I got to crash a database because I tried a union once, and all of a sudden I got a message from my boss email that says, hey, Brian, are you running some query because none of our data analysts, none of our people can get access to Emma? I'm like, oh, sorry. Yeah, that's me. Sorry, cancel. And I stopped the query. So I got to learn lessons along the way. But it was this really nice learning environment where I got to get feedback from the business, and I got to learn how to talk to the business. And that was my strength. I came from being able to talk to the business. I had a fantastic relationship with my dad, and I got to build, this wonderful system for him. And I got to get really direct feedback from somebody who wasn't afraid to tell me, you're wrong here. This is not right. It wasn't that he was unkind. It was that he was just getting to the point. You go to work, you get to the point, you bring it back, and it's like, okay, I got to get my, I got to go, do something else. And so I got to learn SQL. I got to build these things up, and that got me experimenting with new things because I went through and says, okay, well, we know loss ratio, but wouldn't it be nice if I could just see the claims? Like because there's a lot of blank space for these items. I just want to get a lot of details and claims, and I want to get deeper granularity on those. So we ended up creating a claims data mart. Then the next thing we wanted to do was, okay, we want to look at the dispatch system. How can I go into dispatch and see, what items are coming in there? And can we match dispatch with what we're seeing in claims and items and do an analysis there? So we created a dispatch data mart. And that became my 3 points. So I ended up creating these SQL reports to go in and pull this data. I ended up pulling them into Tableau. That ended up creating Tableau Server, which is a product we ended up purchasing because now we had a bunch of reports we wanted to use and get out. All the executives had their own dashboards they were using. I ended up getting to run this bi-weekly meeting where we go through loss ratio, we go through items, we go and see how the business is operating, what is it working, what's working, what's not working, and I got to be at the center of that. And that was wonderful. Like there's another story here that I tell to be part of this one where I went to MIT and I did Python, and I think I will save that for another day because there was another lesson I learned from that's different here. But what I found is that I had to teach myself a lot to get this working, but I was in the right environment to make it work. I had the drive to do these things, and I ended up, teaching myself. Like that's the thing. Another person, like my brother Greg, who's an amazing salesperson, could have been put into this job and would have done none of this. He wouldn't have cared, or he may have found another way to solve the problem. It just didn't naturally line up with him. I was fortunate that it did naturally line up with me, and I went and did the supplemental learning. I had ideas, and I had good mentors along the way. I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, at least 3. My original boss, the SQL DBA Braxton, and my father kind of guided me along the way, and that ended up teaching me the basics of this area. So at some point 3 years later, the job was done, and that's something I learned about data analytics, was that basically you start off with an emergency, you create the early reports and build a ton of value. You expand out to build your dashboard, the reporting tool you need. You automate that away so that the reports come out naturally. And then eventually people just stop. Once the problem is solved, the dashboard just stop being useful. I did that job for about 3 years and loss ratio was fine. As a matter of fact, I don't think in the next 10 years, loss ratio was a big issue. There may have been 1 year where, like 1 or 2 years where it became an issue, but really those dashboards solved the loss ratio problem. We saw things better than we ever did. And I think our profitability went up by a couple $1,000,000. So there was a big bottom line impact. But the problem was solved. And I really wasn't needed in that role. And so originally I wanted to leave and go into, do things on my own. I learned SQL. I learned that. So I thought, okay, cool. Like, can I enter this industry? And again, there was other technologies I had learned that along the way that I didn't get to use in this job. I was like, man, I'm excited to do that. And I wanted to work for a startup. So I applied to a bunch of jobs online and I didn't know what I was. So I just said, I know SQL, I know business, I know this, no title. It wasn't until I applied to a job in Indianapolis for a company called HC1, HC1.com, that had a role called BI writer. And I looked at it and it was, you use a tool like Tableau, you write SQL queries, you help customers build reports. And I'm like, oh, I'm not the Department of Analytics. I'm a BI writer. And that literally, I've been doing that job for 3 years. And that is the first time I had heard that term. It wasn't like I was even outside of the industry. I was reading up on Tableau. I was going into SQL. First time I heard the term, never heard it before. I applied to the job. I had great experience. And that's kind of started me on my way. So I guess you can say that that's really, one of the entryways I had. And probably one of the more important ones because it gave me a footing in the industry. Because I found that I still had barriers I had to get through. There are still other barriers. And maybe if this was, interesting to you folks, please tell me, write a comment saying you like this, because I'll go further into what happened next, because there was a time where I tried to get more technical in the next job, HC1, and they were having none of that. There were nights and weekends work I picked up that helped deepen my experience in Python, in learning. There was the story about how I learned Python, how I eventually left the industry. So there's a lot more details to get into, but this one really set me up to get a foot in the door, really do the job, and, be able to learn slowly. So that's really the start of my story. There's a lot of hard work. There was a lot of learning. There was a lot of luck, and there was a lot of people pulling me up as I'm recognizing this. I didn't even start the story thinking that, but now I'm recognizing how many people were there to help me, even distant people like, the doctor at, Stanford who built the SQL course, but there's people like Braxton who, like, he didn't have to be nice. He didn't have to sit down and teach, the boss's kid what to do. But he did. He hit a lot of complexity. He did a good job. I owe him a big thanks for what he did. I had my boss, Todd, who basically lifted me up, where it's like he structured it. He helped me with the BA work. He would help solve those challenging problems. He did that up. My dad gave me really great structure to give me that feedback. And so when I think of why do I do this work? Why am I starting Schusterian when I'm doing it? It's because I want to do the same thing for others. I was lifted up. I had to work hard. You cannot get away from that. You have to be lifting up. You have to be, our participant in being lifted up. You have to lift. But I was lifted nonetheless. As I was pushing, other people were pulling me. Not just one person, many people. And over time, that just continued. And eventually, I got to start lifting people around me. And now I'm trying to lift as many people as I can. I'm working with people out of boot camps. I'm working with people who are doing who are career changers, learning courses online. And I want to be somebody who gets to lift them as well. So maybe that gives you a better idea of why I'm starting this brand, why I want to create products here and services to help, this community, because it really is my story. And the best way I can help is just by starting and lifting people, one at a time. Eventually might find something that scales. Maybe I create a product that's better than, what's out there for you folks today. But at least today, I can sit and tell my story. I can sit and give mentorship. I can do interviews. I can help this. I can sit in and give speeches. So that's what I love to do, and I hope I can continue doing that. So that's my story of one of the stories of how I entered the industry. There's another one that is a far more self-reliant feeling, I guess. But I think this story gives a really good idea of why I'm interested in this. So thank you very much for listening in this way. I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback if this sort of format's interesting to you. If you have an idea of what you want to hear next, if you just want to continue hearing stories, because this is there's a lot more, and there's a lot of lessons I can go share. So if this is interesting, I can just continue doing this. So thank you very much for listening this long, and I will talk to you all later.